"You've been invisible to us for too long," my daughter-in-law said with a smile I had learned to recognize over the years. I set down my coffee cup slowly, the steam curling up like the days I had spent unnoticed, the years I had poured into a family that seemed to have moved on without me. The morning light fell across the hardwood floor, the same floor I had polished countless times while preparing holiday dinners no one now remembered. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch between us, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, the traffic a distant reminder that the world moved forward, even when you felt left behind. I remembered birthdays that passed with empty chairs, anniversaries celebrated with the echoes of laughter in rooms I had once filled with warmth, and the quiet way my suggestions were brushed aside as trivial. I looked at Karen, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly, every gesture calculated, and I felt a familiar twinge of the old ache, but it was tempered now with something steadier, a patience I had cultivated over decades. Michael lingered near the doorway, hesitant, caught between loyalty and habit, as if unsure how to navigate the tension that had silently built over so many years. I smiled, a small, deliberate motion, letting the weight of that simple gesture carry the history of all the moments they thought I hadn't noticed. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the kitchen, mingling with the faint scent of coffee, grounding me in the present, reminding me that I was here, that I had been here, and that my presence was not something to be ignored. I began to move through the morning, straightening a few scattered papers, adjusting the placemats for our impromptu family brunch, and in every motion, there was an undercurrent of intention, a quiet assertion that I was no longer just a background figure in the story of our lives. I recounted to myself the small victories that had gone unacknowledged, the nights spent helping with homework while juggling my own projects, the support I had offered quietly when crises arose, and the respect that had been withheld. Each memory reinforced a resolve that had been silently growing, like the steady rise of the sun through the blinds, unhurried but unstoppable. I glanced again at Karen and Michael, noting the micro-expressions that flickered and vanished, the subtle betrayals, the unspoken dismissals, and I let them settle in my mind without a word, observing, cataloging, understanding. The table was set with care, the silverware aligned just so, the sunlight glinting off polished surfaces, a testament to the order I brought into spaces even when unrecognized, and in that arrangement, there was power, silent and unyielding. I poured another cup of coffee, feeling the warmth seep through my palms, a tactile reminder that I was in control of my own morning, my own decisions, my own story. For the first time in years, the quiet dignity I maintained was not just survival, it was preparation, a deliberate pacing of patience and observation that would soon reach its turning point. The city continued to stir outside, unaware of the subtle transformation that had begun within these walls, and I let the calm seep into my bones, knowing that the moment when recognition would shift, when my voice would finally carry the weight it deserved, was approaching, like the unmistakable first notes of a symphony poised to erupt. The sunlight shifted across the living room as I pored over the stack of papers I had gathered quietly over the past weeks. Receipts, notes, schedules, and reminders lay before me, each item a testament to the careful observation I had kept, the details that Karen and Michael thought I had not noticed. I traced my finger along the edges of the documents, my mind replaying the small slights and dismissals that had accumulated over the years, and I let the memory sharpen my focus rather than my anger. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, the sound filling the quiet house as I methodically organized my notes and arranged them in order of importance, planning the moments when my calm intervention would be most effective. The aroma of brewed coffee lingered, a comforting scent that anchored me, reminding me that I controlled the rhythm of this morning, the pace of my thoughts, the direction of my actions. I glanced at the photographs on the wall, snapshots of family gatherings, birthdays, and anniversaries, now tinged with a bitter irony, the smiles frozen in time masking the distance that had grown between us. Michael wandered past the hallway, stopping briefly as if sensing my quiet presence, and I acknowledged him with a small nod, letting him feel the weight of my awareness without a single word. Karen moved to adjust a chair at the dining table, her movements precise, calculated, but I could see the micro-expressions flicker, an unease that she quickly covered, a subtle reminder that I had not been invisible. I poured myself another cup of coffee, the warmth grounding me, and I reflected on the years I had quietly managed the household, balanced budgets, planned meals, and coordinated family events, all without recognition, all without fanfare. I made a note to myself of the conversations I had overheard, the decisions that were made without my input, and the promises that had been quietly broken, cataloging each with precision. As the minutes passed, I arranged the documents into a sequence that would allow me to present my perspective logically and calmly, ensuring that when the moment came, the clarity of my position would be undeniable. The sun climbed higher, the light shifting across the wooden floorboards, highlighting the meticulous care with which I had prepared my space, and I felt the subtle surge of readiness, the quiet confidence that comes from being prepared, from knowing every detail, every nuance of the situation. I took a slow breath, letting the awareness of control wash over me, and I thought about the afternoon ahead, the encounter that would finally reveal the depth of my observations, the careful accumulation of evidence that would establish my voice in the family without confrontation, without drama, but with undeniable authority. Each tick of the clock reminded me that the moment was approaching, that the patience I had exercised for so many years was about to culminate in recognition, and I welcomed the anticipation with a steady heart, knowing that the shift I had orchestrated silently would speak louder than any argument ever could. The afternoon light spilled through the blinds, casting long stripes across the living room floor where I had carefully laid out the documents I had organized earlier. Each folder represented a thread in the family narrative, pieces of conversations, receipts, and schedules that Karen and Michael believed had escaped my notice. I traced a finger along the edges of a note from months ago, recalling the subtle dismissals, the offhand remarks, and the decisions made without consulting me. Michael entered the room quietly, his shoes tapping softly against the hardwood, and paused at the doorway, glancing at the stacks I had arranged with deliberate care. Karen moved past, adjusting a vase of flowers on the side table, her movements precise, almost rehearsed, unaware that I observed the tiniest shifts in expression, the micro-changes that betrayed her confidence. I walked slowly through the room, checking the alignment of papers and the placement of pens, the motions deliberate, a quiet assertion that I had returned to presence in the spaces they had taken for granted. I reflected on the holidays I had coordinated, the dinners I had prepared, the birthdays I had celebrated with care, now seen through the lens of years of being ignored, and I let the memories crystallize into a calm clarity that settled over me. The aroma of coffee lingered, mingling with the faint scent of polished wood and fresh flowers, grounding me in the present as I mapped out the order in which I would address each point of observation, each slight, each instance of being overlooked. The rhythm of the house, usually so familiar, seemed different now, charged with anticipation, as if it recognized the change in my demeanor, the subtle power that had been quietly accumulating over time. I paused at the window, looking out over the street where the neighbors went about their afternoon routines, completely unaware of the quiet transformation taking place within these walls, and I allowed myself a small, private smile at the thought of how things would unfold. Each tick of the wall clock marked not just the passage of time, but the preparation for the moment when my observations and careful planning would converge, when my measured patience would give way to an undeniable presence, a clear and calm authority that could no longer be ignored. Karen passed by again, a small frown briefly crossing her face before she masked it with a polite smile, and I noted it without comment, cataloging the response as part of the unfolding pattern I had patiently observed. Michael lingered near the hallway, his posture slightly stiff, eyes darting toward me as he sensed the subtle shift in atmosphere, the quiet control I now exercised. I set the final folder in place and took a slow breath, feeling the weight of years of patience, the accumulation of awareness, and the steady, deliberate readiness that would guide the next steps, a readiness that spoke louder than any argument or confrontation ever could, a presence that demanded recognition without a single word being spoken. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting a warm glow across the living room where the documents and notes were neatly arranged. I sat in the armchair, my hands folded over a steaming mug of tea, and allowed myself to reflect on the careful patience that had brought me to this moment. Each detail I had observed over the years, each slight, each overlooked effort, now formed a mosaic of understanding, a clear map of how I had been treated and how I would navigate the coming hours. Karen passed by the doorway, adjusting a throw pillow on the sofa, and I noticed the slight hesitation in her movements, the brief pause as if she sensed the quiet authority I now carried without a word. Michael lingered near the hallway, glancing toward me with a cautious curiosity, aware that the energy in the room had shifted subtly but unmistakably. I took a sip of tea, savoring the warmth, and allowed my gaze to drift across the room, noting the small details that had once gone unnoticed, the polished wood, the neatly aligned photographs, the subtle arrangement of chairs and cushions, all now serving as a backdrop to the quiet command I had cultivated. I recalled the afternoons I had spent organizing family events, the nights I had stayed up balancing budgets, the countless times I had offered guidance and support that had been quietly disregarded, and I felt the steady rise of confidence, the calm certainty that came from knowing my own worth and my own abilities. The sunlight reflected off the windowpane, creating a gentle pattern on the floor as I reviewed my notes once more, ensuring that every point, every observation, every recorded slight would be presented in a clear, calm, and undeniable way. Karen and Michael moved through the space, unaware that every glance, every subtle motion, every choice they made was being quietly noted, catalogued, and understood. I adjusted my posture in the armchair, feeling the weight of accumulated knowledge, the strength of measured patience, and the readiness that comes from meticulous preparation. The kitchen timer chimed softly in the background, marking the passage of time, and I allowed the moment to stretch, to reinforce the sense of calm authority I carried. Each tick of the clock reinforced the understanding that the situation was now fully in my awareness. That the years of unnoticed effort and overlooked contributions had coalesced into a presence that could no longer be ignored. I took a final sip of tea, setting the cup down with deliberate care, and allowed myself a quiet, controlled smile, knowing that the path I had prepared would soon lead to a recognition of my value and the respect that had long been withheld, a shift that would unfold naturally, without confrontation, but with unmistakable clarity and impact. The late afternoon light softened against the walls, highlighting the subtle details of the living room I had carefully arranged for this very moment. Each note and document sat precisely in order, a quiet testament to the hours I had spent observing, recording, and understanding every slight and overlooked effort from Karen and Michael. I moved slowly through the space, adjusting a picture frame, aligning a few pens, the motions deliberate and unhurried, as if the very act of organizing was a demonstration of the patience and control I now possessed. Michael lingered near the kitchen, his eyes darting toward me as he sensed the shift in the room, the quiet authority I radiated without speaking a word. Karen adjusted the cushions on the sofa, her movements precise, almost mechanical, unaware that I noted every micro-expression, the subtle unease beneath her polished composure. I took a sip from my tea, letting the warmth settle my mind, and I traced a mental timeline of all the efforts I had quietly contributed to the family, the holidays organized flawlessly, the meals prepared with care, the birthdays remembered even when mine had been ignored. Each recollection reinforced the quiet strength I had cultivated over the years, a strength that did not need to be loud to be undeniable. I glanced at the clock, the hands moving steadily, and I allowed myself a small, private acknowledgement of how far I had come, how the careful accumulation of observation and patience had prepared me for this precise moment. The sunlight fell across the hardwood, glinting off the polished surfaces, casting shadows that mirrored the unspoken tension in the room, the weight of attention now fully on me. I moved to the desk, arranging the final folder and notes in the sequence I had prepared, the order deliberate, each piece a stepping stone toward the quiet assertion of presence that would soon become evident to both Karen and Michael. The subtle aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the lingering scent of polished wood and linen, grounding me in the present, reminding me that the power of preparation and awareness had always been mine, even when overlooked. I straightened in the armchair, the comfort of the cushion supporting a body that had carried years of unnoticed effort and wisdom, and I let my eyes wander over the familiar surroundings, each element now part of the stage I had silently constructed. Michael moved closer, a tentative curiosity in his posture, while Karen's smile briefly faltered as she glanced toward the papers I had aligned with meticulous care. I did not speak, I did not rush, my calm presence alone was enough to command attention, to make evident that I had not only observed, but understood, and that the years of quiet patience were about to culminate in recognition. Every small detail, every organized note, every carefully placed object in this room was part of the orchestration, a demonstration that influence and awareness could be exerted with subtlety and precision, and that the quiet assertion of authority was far more powerful than any overt confrontation. The evening light dimmed across the living room, casting a soft amber glow over the papers and notes that had become my silent allies. I moved carefully between the desk and the armchair, my movements deliberate, measured, each action a quiet reinforcement of the presence I had cultivated over the past weeks. Michael lingered near the hallway, shifting from foot to foot, his gaze catching mine for a brief moment before darting away, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Karen adjusted the vase on the side table, her hands steady but her eyes betraying a subtle tension that she quickly masked with a polite smile. I allowed myself a slow breath, letting the warmth of the tea in my hands and the faint aroma of the freshly baked bread anchor me in the present, a reminder that control is not always loud, that influence often manifests in observation and timing rather than confrontation. I reviewed the sequence I had prepared, noting the moments where subtle questions, gentle suggestions, or quiet comments could shift the balance, each choice calculated to assert my presence without overt challenge. The photographs on the wall, once unnoticed, now served as markers of history, each memory reinforcing the understanding that the patience and care I had invested were not lost, that the awareness I had gained over time positioned me to act with clarity and impact. I straightened a cushion, aligned a stack of notes, and allowed my gaze to drift across the room, noting how light and shadow highlighted the objects I had arranged with purpose, each detail quietly underscoring the authority I had cultivated. Michael shifted slightly, his posture uncertain, and I acknowledged him with a measured nod, not as a demand but as an unspoken assertion of awareness and readiness. Karen moved again, setting a glass down with careful precision, and I observed the small micro-expressions that crossed her face, cataloging them silently, understanding the subtle shifts in confidence and composure that came from realizing, even if only faintly, that the dynamics in the room were changing. I sat back in the armchair, taking another measured sip of tea, feeling the weight of years of overlooked efforts and unnoticed contributions condense into a quiet power, a presence that required no loud declaration yet demanded recognition. The house, familiar in every detail, seemed to hold its breath alongside me, the ticking clock marking the deliberate passage of time, the anticipation building not as noise but as a quiet crescendo, preparing the stage for the moment when observation and preparation would converge into undeniable presence and influence, a moment that would shift understanding, recognition, and respect without a single word raised in anger or complaint. The golden light of early evening stretched across the room, touching the polished surfaces and the neatly aligned folders that represented my careful planning. I moved slowly between the armchair and the desk, tracing the edges of the papers with deliberate attention, a silent affirmation of the years I had spent observing and understanding every nuance of Karen and Michael's behavior. Michael hovered near the doorway, shifting his weight and glancing toward me, sensing the quiet shift in energy but uncertain how to respond. Karen adjusted a cushion on the sofa, her fingers tight around the fabric, and I noted the brief flicker of hesitation in her expression, cataloging it silently as a marker of awareness that had begun to emerge in her. I sipped from my mug, feeling the warmth settle through my hands and into my mind, a grounding reminder that control and observation were as much about presence as action. The faint hum of the city outside contrasted with the measured quiet inside, the steady ticking of the clock punctuating the careful rhythm of the room, the passage of time marking preparation and anticipation. I reviewed my sequence again, mentally rehearsing subtle phrases, quiet questions, and gentle suggestions that would assert my awareness and authority without a single confrontational word. Each photograph, each object in the room, each carefully aligned note was a testament to the years I had quietly contributed, the patience I had cultivated, and the knowledge I now wielded with precision. I straightened the edge of a folder, letting the motion echo the calm discipline I had honed, and allowed my gaze to pass over the room, noting the soft shadows and light that played across the furniture, emphasizing the deliberate order I had imposed. Michael shifted slightly, a subtle sign of discomfort, while Karen's eyes briefly met mine and then flicked away, a quiet acknowledgement of the presence they could no longer overlook. I took another measured sip of tea, allowing the warmth to reinforce my calm authority, the sense that I had orchestrated this moment without haste or urgency, only with careful, deliberate preparation. The scent of polished wood and fresh flowers filled the air, a reminder of the environment I had maintained, the order I had created, and the quiet strength that now commanded attention in the room. I allowed the pause to linger, feeling the tension in their posture, the flicker of awareness and recognition, understanding that the subtle shift in dynamic was complete, that the years of quiet patience and meticulous observation had positioned me to be seen and acknowledged, and that the next steps would unfold with clarity, measured, and undeniable presence. The room had grown quiet, the soft glow of the setting sun casting long, gentle shadows across the carefully arranged documents and photographs. I moved through the space deliberately, adjusting the edges of the papers and straightening the chairs, each small motion a reinforcement of the presence I had cultivated and the authority I now held quietly but undeniably. Michael lingered by the doorway, his eyes tracing my movements, hesitation and curiosity mingling in his gaze, while Karen moved slowly across the room, her polished composure betraying a subtle tension she could not completely mask. I poured a fresh cup of tea, the warmth flowing through my hands and steadying my thoughts. And I allowed myself a moment to reflect on the meticulous preparation that had brought me to this point, the years of unnoticed efforts, the careful observation, the silent accumulation of knowledge about how each choice and action had affected the family dynamic. Every photograph, every note, every small detail in the room served as a reminder of patience and persistence, of the quiet strength that had been honed over years of being overlooked and underestimated. I traced my fingers along the edge of a folder containing months of careful documentation, the memory of overlooked holidays, ignored birthdays, and countless small gestures of kindness fueling a calm resolve rather than frustration. The faint scent of coffee and fresh flowers mingled in the air, grounding me in the moment, anchoring the awareness that the shift in authority had already begun, that the balance of respect and recognition would no longer be ignored. I allowed my gaze to sweep across the room, noting the subtle micro-expressions in Karen's face, the brief glances Michael cast toward me, each one a confirmation of the quiet impact that observation, preparation, and patience could create. I moved deliberately, placing the final documents in order, aligning every object in the space with purpose, the arrangement itself a statement of control and clarity. The light outside deepened, reflecting off polished surfaces, and I could feel the calm momentum building, the quiet certainty that the actions I had taken, the patience I had exercised, and the knowledge I had gathered were converging into a moment of undeniable recognition. I did not need to speak loudly, I did not need to demand attention. The presence I maintained, the careful orchestration of space and timing, and the steady confidence in my observations communicated authority far more powerfully than any words could. As the sun dipped lower, the shadows stretching across the hardwood floor, I felt a subtle shift in the energy of the room, the unspoken acknowledgement that the quiet patience of years had led to a position of influence that was both clear and respected, and that the unfolding moments would naturally reveal the culmination of careful preparation, awareness, and the quiet assertion of presence that could no longer be overlooked. The room had grown quiet, the last traces of sunlight slipping through the blinds and leaving the space bathed in soft twilight. I stood by the desk, reviewing the carefully arranged documents one last time, each folder, each note, a record of patient observation and methodical preparation. Karen and Michael lingered nearby, subtle unease in their posture, the awareness of my presence settling over them in ways neither could ignore or dismiss. I walked slowly through the room, adjusting the alignment of a folder, the placement of a pen, the arrangement of a chair, each motion deliberate and measured, a silent assertion of authority that did not require words. Michael shifted, glancing at me, his expression a mixture of curiosity and tentative respect, while Karen's practiced composure briefly faltered, a fleeting hesitation that spoke volumes about the shift in dynamics. I took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth ground me, and allowed my gaze to sweep across the room, taking in every detail, every shadow, every reflection of light on polished surfaces, recognizing how each element could support the quiet command I now held. The faint hum of the city outside contrasted with the deliberate stillness inside, each tick of the clock marking the measured passage of time, the anticipation of change that had been quietly building for years. I reflected on the history of careful effort and unnoticed contributions, the holidays organized, the meals prepared, the small acts of consideration and support that had been taken for granted, and I felt a steady certainty that these accumulated experiences had culminated in a presence impossible to overlook. I straightened the last folder, aligning it with precision, and felt the subtle power of preparation settle fully, a quiet authority radiating without a single word spoken. Karen and Michael exchanged brief glances, a silent acknowledgement that the familiar pattern had shifted, that the balance of respect and recognition had tilted in ways they could no longer ignore. I allowed myself a private, controlled smile, savoring the knowledge that patience and observation had achieved a force more lasting and compelling than any direct confrontation. The room held a new energy, quiet yet unmistakable, the culmination of years of overlooked efforts transforming into a presence that commanded attention naturally, without haste, without noise, and yet undeniably clear. I moved to the window, letting the last light of day illuminate the room, the shadows stretching across the polished hardwood, and I realized that the subtle shifts, the careful orchestration, and the measured patience of years had created a moment where recognition, respect, and understanding would now unfold naturally, leaving no question of the value and presence I had always maintained.